Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Now today we're going to build one of the most useful and versatile projects we've ever done, a router station. It makes that tool even more productive than it already is. I'll show you how next, right here on the new Yankee Workshop.
The new Yankee Workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
Welcome to another temple of wood. This one in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, world headquarters for American Woodworker magazine. And this is where the staff test tools and woodworking accessories for the magazine articles. Now I asked them to bring out a couple projects they did a few years ago. Router tables. Here's their first version. Pretty straightforward. A laminate top with a router mounted underneath, drawers for router bits, and additional storage down below. Now the fence is pretty simple, made out of hardwood. It clamps to the table edge, and each side can be fine-tuned. A few years later, a new version. They moved the router to the center of the table, provided a groove for a miter gauge, simplified the fence, and devised a little bit better dust collection. But what's unique about the new version is the way you adjust the router. If you have a plunge router, they took a flexible shaft and adapted it to the router with a crank so that you can easily raise and lower the router bit. Now another nice feature about this version is that it's modular. You can easily remove the router itself. With the top unclamped, it pulls right off. And you can now see a plenum where the wood chips are sucked through the bottom area and out through a hose hooked up to your shop vac. Now if you don't want to take the whole station, you can remove just the router portion and take it anywhere you want. Now there's a lot of good ideas here. I don't think they'd mind if I borrowed a couple. Hey David, where'd you get these knobs? Now after studying those two router stations and coming up with a few ideas of my own, this was the result, and it works great. Now there's plenty of room for bit storage. One change that I made is I changed the switch. I went from a toggle switch to this safety switch so that you can't turn the router on accidentally. Now down at the bottom, instead of a couple drawers, I've made one large drawer on full extension slides. And I divided it to give me an area to store manuals and all my accessories and bit sets like this door making set and this sash making set. Now I did include a groove for my miter gauge and a fully adjustable fence. Now one change that I made on the fence is to make the back of it really high right over the center so that I can install a feather board if I have to hold the stock tight to the table. And of course it does have vacuum pickup. If you'd like to build this router station, a measured drawing is available, and you'll hear more about that before the end of the program. Now I want to get started today by building the carcass. But before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these, safety glasses, and of course, hearing protection when necessary. Now with all the 3/4 inch thick pieces of plywood cut for the carcass, the first step is to mill a rabbet along the back edge of one of the sides. Now with the top removed from my router station, you can see how the pieces fit together. The back fits into the rabbet that I just milled in the side. The next thing I want to do is mill a rabbet along the top edge of each side panel to receive this cleat, which stops the wrench draw from tipping up as it's pulled out, and it acts as a locator for blocks that are underneath the top. Now that's the groove for the bottom shelf. And that's the dado for the middle shelf. Now I've just milled one of two dados in the middle shelf, which will receive the vertical panels of the draw case. Now I've just run another dado in the vertical panel, and that dado receives the baffle for the dust collection. Now that final dado is in the bottom shelf, and it receives the toe kick. Now here I've laid out for a cutout of the toe kick in the side panel. And when I cut across the grain on plywood, I like to score it so it won't splinter. Now this notch is for a cleat at the top of the vertical panel to join the carcass together. Now the bit storage drawers are supported by some half-inch plywood cleats that are glued and nailed to the sides of the cabinet. And now's the time to install them because I couldn't get a screwdriver or a nail gun in there. Just a little bit of glue on each piece. Now these are all made out of scrap plywood that I had hanging around the shop. A couple spacers as guides. Set them in position and brat them in. Well, now I've put some glue in the dados and I'm ready to install the bottom and the middle shelf. All right, now a clamp to make sure it's pulled together tightly, and I'll secure it with a 4-penny finish nail, toe-nailed in. Now I can attach the baffle to the interior vertical panels. This makes part of the dust collection system. Now here's the cleat that holds the case together at the top. Now I've temporarily clamped the back of the cabinet in place, and I'm putting some marks to cut some slots for biscuits which will support the shelf. Now getting this many biscuits to line up with this many holes will take a little bit of fooling around. That's good. Now I've installed a couple blocks here to receive the toe kick. It just slides into the dado, and I'll secure it with some brads. Now any place the edge grain of the plywood shows, I'm going to cover it with these hardwood strips attached with glue and brads. Now I've just made a kerf cut in the top piece of the face frame. And that kerf is right on the underside of the piece, and it receives this plexi insert, which is part of the dust collection system. I also want to install a couple cleats against which the insert sits. This oak strip cleans up the back edges of the carcass. Now we're ready to start building the storage drawers, and I'll start with the lower one. The first thing is to rabbet the drawer front 15/16 by 3/8. Now this dado in the drawer front is for the divider. And this is the corresponding dado in the back of the drawer. Now this dado in the side piece receives the back. These smaller grooves are for the bottom of the drawer. For the assembly, the first thing that I do is wet the joint because I'm going to use this moisture cure glue, which is very strong when it cures. For the last several minutes, I've been milling up parts for the drawers that store the bits. Now, the front is made out of 3/4-inch plywood, and the ends are rabbeted to fit into the carcass, and the bottom is rabbeted to receive the shelf. The shelf is made up of two pieces of plywood, a 3/4-inch piece and a 1/4-inch piece. I drill the holes for the bit through the 3/4 piece, and then back it with the 1/4-inch. It's a lot easier to drill the holes through several shelves at once. So I've clamped 4 together, and I'm using a bit that's just a little bit bigger than a 1/2 inch. Well, now I've switched to a 9/32 diameter bit, and that'll make the holes for our 1/4-inch shank router bits. Well, while we're here at the drill press, we might as well drill those 1/4-inch holes for the shaker knobs. That way they'll be nice and straight. Now I just nail on the backer board. That's all there is to it. Now to put them together, a little bit of that tough glue and a couple brads. Okay, now the wrench drawer was built just like the big storage drawer. We'll just slip that in place. And the last thing that I have to do is make a blank, which fits right in here, for the switch. And I'll do that before we quit for the day. Okay, that's perfect. Tomorrow we'll make the top and the fence. I want to get started this morning making the top for our router station. Now the field of the top, the white material, is known as melamine. It's 1 inch thick, it has a particle board core, and it has a high pressure laminate on both sides. I have to do 2 things: cut a hole all the way through for the router motor, then very carefully rabbet the edges so that the base plate fits tightly and perfectly flush to the top. All right, that takes care of the through hole. Now I can remove these temporary cleats, and the template will be set up to make those rabbets for the base plate. Now I applied the temporary cleats with a little bit of hot glue. Now we're ready to make the rabbet. The template was very carefully made to be 9 1/4 inches by 12 1/4 inches, which is a 1/4 inch in each direction larger than the base plate. Now that's to account for the difference between the collar and the router bit that I'm using. A couple adjustments and we'll be ready to make the rabbet. All right, let's see how it fits. That's good, nice and flush. Now I'll remove the template and wrap the top with oak. Now, the best way to attach the oak strips is to just use biscuits and glue. No need for mechanical fasteners. All right, now I still have a couple more things to do to the top, but we'll set it aside to dry and start working on the fence. The fence system is made up of plywood and hardwood. It needs to be fully adjustable forward and back. It has to go back far enough so that I can easily remove the router without taking off the fence. I have sliding hardwood pieces so that I can close the gap at the router bit for safety. And behind it, a system to collect the wood chips. Let's start by making the base. All right, with a piece cut to the right size and the layout done, the first thing I want to do is cut the slots for the hold downs. To do that, I'm going to use my router and a 5/16 inch diameter bit and a straight edge clamp as a guide. Okay, and that takes care of the cutout for the dust collection. Now I just clip the corners at the miter box. Now here's the fence all laid out, and the first thing I want to do is remove a portion of the top edge with the circular saw and the jigsaw. Now to make the slots for the adjustable hardwood pieces of the fence, I'm using the router bit in my drill press and an adjustable clamp as a guide. Now I've switched to a 3/4 inch Forstner bit that I'm using to rough out a couple square holes for an auxiliary fence. Okay, and that takes care of the opening for the dust collection. I attach the fence to the base with a little bit of glue and some screws. Now to further reinforce the fence and keep it square, I have a little block that goes at each end. Now this part of the dust collector is nothing more than 3 pieces of wood that form a box, and I'm going to cap it off with a piece of plexi. By using a countersink, I can make a recess so that the screw head will be flush. Now I've set my miter gauge at about 7 degrees, and that should take care of the bevel. And a couple holes for the hold downs for the extra fence. Now a little bit of a recess for the hold down bolt so that it's flush and it won't spin when we tighten it down. The adjustable hardwood portions of the fence require 2 holes and a counter bore for the bolts that attach them to the plywood. I'll just knock off the corners with my plane. Some people may want to use their router station as a joiner, and that's what this auxiliary fence is all about. It's another piece of hardwood that can be adjusted in and out. It doesn't go side to side, but if you were joining something, you would run your wood through on this side to a spiral cutting bit, and you'd move this out the amount of material you're removing so that it's supported all the way through. On the back, there are a couple brackets that go through the square holes I made. Those are next. All right, well, before I quit tonight, there's one more thing I want to do. To dress the fence up and cover the end grain of the plywood, I'm going to apply some thin strips of oak. That's going to take a while. See, I told you I'd finish the top before I left last night. I've trimmed all the edges of the plywood with thin strips of oak and attached them with glue and brads. I've also installed this strip of oak, which makes the top of the fence align with the lower section so I can clamp on a feather board if I ever need one. Now I'm finishing up the top, and the first thing to do is to round over the corners. Now to ease the edges on the top, I'm using a chamfering bit, taking off about 1/8 of an inch. Now you may recall that I've installed a track for my miter gauge. You won't use the miter gauge every day, but if you make raised panel doors, you're going to need it. So I purchased from my woodworker's store a couple pieces of aluminum track made specifically for miter gauges. And if you look closely, you can see that the bottom has a bit of a crown in it. And that's so that when you tighten down the screws to secure it in place, it'll squeeze the sides in so that there's no play in your miter gauge. The first step is to make a groove for the track. Now that's pretty good. Now because my dado head is only 13/16 and the track is 1 inch wide, I've had to adjust the fence, run a sample, and now we're ready for the second pass. Now there's a few holes I have to drill in the top. These are for the hole downs for the fence. And that hole is for the dust collection. I pre-drilled the router base to fit my router. Every model will have a different bolt pattern. Now as for the router itself, I like to use a 3-horse or better because we're going to be using some good-sized router bits. On the underside of the top, there are 4 corner blocks that register the top to the base. Now this piece of hardwood with the kerf cut that I just made is going to support the piece of plexi for the front. Now these holes that I'm drilling in the plexi are important because without them the dust collection will starve for air. Now I mixed up a little bit of quick setting epoxy here, and I'm going to put a little bit on a 4-penny finish nail, which is actually the pin that holds the panel in place. I'll just let that go through, tap it flush, and I'll trim it to length after the epoxy sets. Now to hold the glass panel in place, I'm also going to use some epoxy. Just place a little bit in the groove, set the panel in, let it dry. And after the glue cures, we'll give our router station a test run. Okay, now there's the hole for the vacuum hookup. Now let me explain the electrical. Here's the power cord, which runs up to an electrical box on the back, which is to plug your vacuum into, and one on the inside for the router. Both are turned on as soon as you activate the switch. Boy, that works great. Now with it set up in the joiner mode, I have the outfeed fence so that it's even with the cutter, and the infeed fence just slightly back. Now I also know that this is going to work great as an edge molder. You know, it takes a couple days to build a project like this, but I know that I'm going to get a lifetime of use out of it. So until next time, I'm Norm Abram from the new Yankee Workshop.